Hi, with Tacitus Today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about a subject I've covered many times before, Indian immigration. So the subcontinent of India, or the subcontinent generally, which includes India. We could be adding Pakistan and Bangladesh there. So now there's over 2 billion with a B, 2 billion people living in the subcontinent. 90% of whom want to come to the rich West, given that English is the primary sort of second language of not all, but many Indians, then the English-speaking countries are a prime destination. Now, the globalist sort of project is that these people should be allowed more or less to just stroll into the West whenever they want to. And the standards, the bar is set very, very low for Indians who want to immigrate to the West and to countries like Australia. So now we need to remember that there are more people that want to migrate from the Indian subcontinent, more people, that want to migrate to the West than there are white people on the face of planet Earth. So the amount of brown people from the subcontinent swamp the number of white people in the entire planet Earth. So we need to just sort of understand that basic mathematical reality. Now, I've having worked with and hired and worked alongside with, done business with, have traveled the world doing business. I don't have a particularly high opinion of Indians. They're in a Socratic philosophical sense. They're quite pleasant to have conversations with, and I do like. I met an Indian guy a little while ago who was something of an aficionado on 1950s British movies, and I knew a bit about it, so we had a good chat, and it was a pleasant chat. I enjoyed it. I quite liked the guy, but nonetheless, they do not make good immigrants, and even Indians who have been living in the West for 5, 6, 7 generations, they still consider themselves to be Indian. They still only marry and intermarry with other Indians. And they still want to live in enclaves, Indian enclaves, and they have, other than people they have to tolerate for business or something like that, they don't have white friends. That they, other than again politically strategic friendships, they don't have white friends. When they have their Indian society meetings, it's only Indians welcome. And yet they'll scream racism from the rooftops if they're not invited into all white or primarily white gatherings. So I don't think they make good immigrants at all. They come to the West to take and to take and to take. Now, if they're professional, like there's an Indian guy I know who's one of the top-ranked surgeons in Australia, he's giving in the sense of his skills in the surgeries that he performs, but he's the darling of the Indian establishment. So there's a disproportionate amount of his patients are Indian. So the wider community isn't really benefiting from his skill. He's not giving it out to everybody. It's primarily he's giving it to Indian people. So anyway, I was at a business meeting, and it was in one of those sort of exhibition centre type places, and the meeting next door to where we were, the meeting next door was some Indian society, Australian Indian society for something or other, and so I noticed that with interest. I thought, well, what's that all about? And so I was able to, I wasn't really needed at that other meeting, and one of my colleagues was sort of looking after that. So just out of interest, as I'm an information gatherer, as you may have already worked out. So I went outside into sort of a hallway or like a promenade sort of area, and the doors were big and they were wide open, so it wasn't like you couldn't hear or see what was going on. So I sort of sat down on one of the very comfortable seats and started sort of doodling on my mobile phone, but I could see and hear what was going on inside this Indian thing, and it was quite scary. It was, I thought it was chilling. I mean, give me your comments below, but speaker after, and there was lots of men and women. The speaker after speaker got up. These are Indians, still with quite a thick Indian accent, or some with Australian accents, but mostly with a thick Indian accent. So they haven't been here that long, and they were talking. This was sort of, it seemed to be some sort of what were my dreams and life experiences, something like that. I think from the certainly the bit that I saw. But speaker after speaker was getting up and saying, and since I was a little kid, I always dreamed of migrating to a rich Western country. I always dreamed, since I was a little kid, since I was in primary school, since I was in kindergarten, and when I was 12 years old, I knew for sure that I wanted to go to Australia, but it's not only that so you've got these hundreds of millions of Indians, I presume, based on this, because they're all getting up and saying the same thing, more or less, how they'd always dreamed of being, everyone they knew always dreamed of migrating to the West, everybody that, their wider family, the village, the friends, sort of, the only people that didn't dream of going to the West were the already very rich Indians who would buy a holiday house in the West anyway. But so now, if you look at the amount of people that are not rich in India, now bear in mind, just India alone has got a population pushing 1.5 billion at the moment, and something like 300 million of them are under the age of 30. So this will just give you an idea of, or 300 million between the ages of 18 and 30. It's a huge population bulge in quite a narrow age range. So, and now not only that they were talking about this, but many of them were getting up saying, my entire family now lives all across the West, and my cousins live in England, and my aunts and uncles live in America, and my nieces and nephews live in Canada, and And so they've got this vast Indian network all across the Western world. New Zealand, Australia, Canada, United States, Britain, and so on, and they're already organising for other relatives that they have, other people in their village, the second cousins, the third cousins. There's this huge network. It's almost a people trafficking network, for fuck's sake, about moving more Indians into and it's a good thing, because the more Indians they bring to Australia, for example, or the West, the more Indianized the West will become, which will be good for them. Until they're in the majority, then they're running the show and so on. And they consider this as inevitable. This is the way they speak. It's inevitable that the Indians will be in the majority in Australia and in other Western countries, Britain and so on. It's inevitable that the Indians will be in the majority, and then we'll decide, the moral compass and framework and so on of society, and the white people will be our servants rather than as it was the other way around in the days of the Raj. So this is quite scary. Now, I guess my concerns are several-fold. Why are low-quality Indians being brought en masse to the West? These are people who, and they're admitting it. I never had a job till I came to Australia. So how the fuck did they get to Australia? Australia is supposed to be getting people who have skills and have qualifications, and these people, one after the other, have none of these things. Time after time, the first job they'd ever had was, maybe they did some work for an NGO, and you got to wonder what role the NGOs were playing in this. But effectively, it's a massive people trafficking scam, as far as I can tell. And the people are quite childlike and quite entitled. A number of women were talking about how they dreamed, they'd seen pictures of the Opera House when they were very young, and they dreamed that one day they would be at the Opera House, and they would say, this is the goal of everyone I know. This is the the sort of priority of everyone I know in India is to come to the West. Now, at the same time, they think the West is morally and spiritually and culturally not just inferior, but vastly inferior, and that the white people are racist to them. And they do understand that there's many white people in the West don't want this many Indians to be coming. But their attitude is, well, that's just too damn bad. We're coming, and that's the end of it. And recent agreements that have been made with not just the Australian government, but other Western governments, is to lower the bar even further for Indians to come to the West. And the Indian government is very, very keen to get rid of as many people of their surplus population as they can. Now, these Indians only want to go to the West. They don't want to go some dirt poor fucking place. They want to go to the rich West. And so they come. Now, my experience with Indians working with them is there's been more experience with the Brahmin caste, I guess, than the others, but also the middle, the lower ranking castes as well. Not the untouchables, but the lower ranking castes, is that they don't see why they should integrate or assimilate. They think they're culturally superior, and they are very, very focused on keeping themselves genetically pure. This is an absolute priority that is practiced, throughout their family. The women in particular are very, very keen on this, but the men too. So they've got no intention of intermarrying, and if any of their children or any member of the family has got a white boyfriend, girlfriend or something, they'll warn them, say, look, if you do this, you will be excommunicated from the Indian community. You'll be cut off from any inheritance. You'll be an outcast, and no one will talk to you. That's it. It'll be finished. So there's huge pressure brought to bear on Indian people, born in Australia, for example, that may want to assimilate or may want to, and no, you do that, you're finished. So there's a lot of, also there's the arranged marriages. The Indian, even there's a woman that they're, I think, 5th generation Australian born, and she insists that her children born in Australia, 5th generation Western born, will only have husbands and brides from the village of their ancestors in India. They'll be, there's an arranged marriage. So they've still got this arranged marriage dowry bullshit thing going on even today, after 5 generations being Western born. So they're determined to keep the Indian culture as pure, super pure, and also they even have a problem with their children, sons and daughters, marrying other Indians who are also born in the West, because they're not Indianized, and there's a risk that if they're both Western born and they get together, their children may assimilate and integrate into Western society. And they're very determined to keep everyone on the Indian, genetic and cultural straight and narrow, as they would see it. So this means Indians just won't assimilate. They just plain won't. Wherever Indians get into a particular organisation, any sort of position of influence or power, they try and do everything they can to turn it into an Indians-only employment scam. So now, in Indian communities, that they gravitate towards particular areas where there are now entire suburb after suburb, where there's nearly only Indian people there. You're hard pressed to see anyone who's not Indian. There's a suburb of Sydney where 20 years ago you'd be lucky to see more than 1 or 2 Indians. Now you're lucky to see more than 1 or 2 white people. That's how quickly it's been transformed. And the integration rate is zero. Also, they've introduced the caste system into Australia now, where the Indians in Australia are now running the Indian caste system, where the Brahmins at the apex and the subservient subcastes doing what's expected of them, and the Brahmins have this. If you go to India, or even when you see it here, a Brahmin has such authority that they can just go to the house of a lower caste member, a lower caste citizen, and they don't have to knock on the door. They have the right to just walk in and through, pick up and touch and do whatever they want inside the building, inside the house, because they're the superior caste, the culturally superior caste, and that they're projecting that attitude in Australia and elsewhere around the West, that as a superior caste they have the right to do what they want. Now I've come across this in hiring Indians. The first Indians that came to Australia, and I've mentioned this before, in the earlier stages of mass migration, they were the Brahmins that claimed to have PhDs in computer science, that sort of thing, claimed to be experts at coding computer code. And first off, the company was putting us on, me under a bit of pressure to hire these people because they were cheaper than the local programmers. So I remember hiring these people who appeared to have impeccable credentials. They had the PhD. They'd worked for big Indian firms, and so they were experts. And I thought, oh well, okay, and take them at their word and hire. And they just weren't cutting any code. They just weren't doing any programming, software programming. And so you'd say, well, what are you doing here? Why aren't we, Ram? Why aren't we seeing any code being cut? And they would bluster and fluster and wave their arms around. Oh, I'm busy. So much work. Yeah. And so, okay, well, I do need to see results. Well, how dare you speak to me like that? And they would perceive, I'm the upper caste. I'm culturally superior to you. You can't talk to me like that. You can't demand that I do work. You can't. I'm socially a prestigious individual. So my mere existence here is a social and an act of social prestige. You can't come and demand that I do work. That's degrading and something that someone of my Brahmin status, simply can't tolerate. And no, I don't give a fuck how it is in India, buddy. You've been hired, you're being paid. Your job is to do programming, cut code. So that's what I expect you to do. And then there'd be more drama and carry on, and this attempt at utter indignation at the impertinence of such a suggestion that they should do work. And I think I fired every Indian that was hired. There was one Sikh guy who I kept on, but every Indian that was hired, I ended up firing. Not because of racism or something like that. They just wouldn't do the fucking work. And I found this sort of attitude universal. Even people, I was dealing with a quite a senior public servant, again with a thick Indian accent. How the fuck he got the jobs beyond? Must have been a diversity hire. I was dealing with him. I found he was duplicitous and he was treacherous. He was always trying to reframe the terms of what was discussed, denying that something was discussed, saying that what was said before was meant in a certain, and so on. And just endless intellectual somersaults. It's interesting because if you read the original documents of, say, in the late 1600s, early 1700s, of the European traders trading with India, particularly the British ones, they would write up, or others. It wasn't just the British. They write up their experiences with the Indian merchants, and the way they would describe the behaviour of the Indian merchants who were Brahmins, or one of the top two castes. The way they would describe the behaviour of the Indian merchants, 300 plus years ago, is exactly the same behaviourally, exactly the same as I encounter today in dealing with Indians. Now it's different when they're the employee and I'm the boss. That's different. But when they're the in this case the senior public servant, and without their signature, my business or the company I've got a share in doesn't get the business, then I have to treat it sort of differently. I've got to be far more patient and so on. So, but I found the Indian guy very difficult to deal with. Again, there's this sort of omnipresent, treachery and duplicity and double dealing and so on. And if you attempt to hold them accountable for it, they're outraged. And of course, they can they can scuttle the business deals. So, but anyway, just on this, I think Indians make very bad immigrants, and I think by bringing out vast numbers of Indians to the West is it's just it's an act of self-destruction. Like, I can't say what if they would integrate, different thing, but they are more than determined to create an Indian sub-country within, sub-nation state within the nation state, to the point where that sub-nation state becomes the biggest entity in the nation, due to the numbers of Indians that come and their procreation. And we see sort of an example of that in Fiji, where Indians were being brought over to Fiji in the 1850s, and they stayed, homogenous. They wouldn't marry outside of, even after 170 years, the amount of Indians intermarrying and so on with the local Fijian population is, I don't think it's even 2%, and that's after 170 years. So then they reached a point where they were so numerous that they demanded that they control all the political machinery and the economic machinery of the Fijian islands, and there ended up being sort of a military coup, and it's now enshrined, as I understand it, enshrined in the Fijian constitution that the local Fijians must control or have majority political power in their own country. So I see that the mass of Indians coming over is part of the self-destruction of the West. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.